Okay, so today is the second session of the first semester on Frobenius subalgebra lattices in tensor categories. So we got the session yesterday. So if you did not come yesterday, remember that here is the QR code, which will work up to March 12. So this session will be the second session for the introduction part, given by slides. So yesterday we did half of the slides, and today we will give to the other half. And from next week, as the next session, we should start with the details. I will write by hand. So let me cover very quickly the slide we did yesterday. So first slide, it was about the motivation coming from subfactor theory. Then we are specifically interested in generalizing a theorem in subfactor theory called Watatanis finiteness theorem to tensor category theory. And the goal is to relax as much as possible the unitary assumption and the tensor assumption. Then we recalled the definition of a monoidal category. So we did that yesterday. The definition of a Frobenius algebra object in a monoidal category, we did that yesterday. Example, when the monoidal category is a trivial category VEC, you recover the usual notion of Frobenius algebra as it pre-exists to the notion of Frobenius algebra object in a monoidal category. We are specifically interested in the connected case because it is a generalization of the irreducible assumption for subfactor, and the Watatanis theorem as you need irreducibility. So connected case, we emphasize that VEC is blind to connected phenomena, so etc. So example, conformal algebra, group theory, and subfactor theory. Then the notion of Frobenius subalgebra, so very important that the so it's almost a Frobenius algebra monomorphism, but you have to remove the coalgebra assumption. Otherwise, as it's written here, it's an isomorphism. So you have that, and you get so you produce this self-dual unital idempotent, etc. So we cover also these slides. So generalization of a theorem in subfactor planar algebra theory to general monoidal category, the exchange relation, and the fact that exchange relation is is equivalent to the notion of Frobenius subalgebra in this specific sense, or self-dual unital idempotent, etc. So now you apply this exchange relation to generalize. So here we need abelian monoidal category. Here it's for general monoidal category. For that you need abelian. And here we need linear for generalizing Landau's theorem. So we define the notion of generalization of the convolution product. And we finished yesterday by this theorem. So you take two Frobenius subalgebra of a connected Frobenius algebra in a K-linear monoidal category, where the unit is linear simple. Then you produce the self-dual unital idempotent BA and BB coming from this Frobenius subalgebra. and you apply the trace. So you have this formula. And when you apply the trace with respect to the morphism alpha, when alpha is an algebra morphism, then you get that. Okay, which just means that the trace alpha of this is equal to this if alpha is an algebra morphism. Okay, but most of the time you will take alpha identity. So when alpha is identity, the trace alpha is a trace, but we will need alpha not identity. That's why we specify that. Okay. Okay. So now let's continue the slides with a key notion. So remember, for generalizing Watatani's theorem, you need to prove two things. To prove it's a lattice, the Frobenius subalgebra form a lattice, and it is finite. But for lattice, it's not true in general. If you take a Frobenius algebra, the Frobenius subalgebra of a Frobenius algebra in a monoidal category, it's not true in general that it forms a lattice. In fact, as it is written in this example, the Frobenius subalgebra may not be closed under intersection. So which is a necessary condition. To be closed under intersection is a necessary condition for being a lattice. It's not sufficient. And this example is in VEC. So you consider the 5-dimensional algebra. So you take the polynomial in 3 variables, and you quotient by this ideal. And so it's a 5-dimensional algebra, K-algebra. And you take kappa. So now we are Frobenius algebra in VEC, so it's the Frobenius algebra structure is defined by kappa, by a bilinear form, non-degenerate, etc. Associative. So you take kappa. So what is that? Is Frobenius, yeah. So for 2 elements in the algebra, you take the coefficient of this element, xy. So xy is so it's 5-dimensional algebra. So xy is an element of the basis. And so any element, you make the product and decompose into linear sum of elements in the basis, and xy is an element in the basis. And this is the coefficient of xy. So the coefficient of c square, if you like, also because xy equals d squared by this relation. Okay, so and this, so you have to check that this form a Frobenius algebra for that. Now you consider the Frobenius subalgebra generated by that and the Frobenius subalgebra generated by that. And you consider the intersection, and you can check that this intersection is not a Frobenius algebra. Why? So here and here, for this Frobenius subalgebra, the kappa is non-degenerate, but on the intersection, it is degenerate, which means that its matrix, its corresponding matrix, has determinant 0. So it's degenerate. It is not. It's not Frobenius. Okay. So it's a very strong restriction. In fact, you cannot. So remember what we did before. We were very, very happy. We can generalize exchange relation or Landau's theorem very generally to monoidal category or abelian monoidal or linear monoidal. Here you have a very strong restriction, which the intersection is not working as you want even for the most trivial category vec, which is k-linear, abelian, all what you want. So this means that you need an extra assumption. You need something new, otherwise it will not work. And this something new is what we will call rigidity invariance. Okay, so what is that? So we will first define that for vec, but in fact, we can generalize. We can generalize this definition to semi-simple C-tensor category, because when it is semi-simple, you can reformulate everything in terms of multiplicity space, and a multiplicity space is a space, so everything works for each multiplicity space. It works as in vec. So in vec, what is the definition of rigid invariant? So you take a vector space to be a Frobenius algebra via some bilinear form kappa, and you fix a basis B for this space, and you define the conjugate linear map M defined this way. So be careful here. So it's a subtlety which we it's a trap. In fact, we faced in the work. We need to consider inner product structure here. So this is inner product, so it's a Hermitian. And so, but kappa here, it's a bilinear form. So there is no, it's not Hermitian, it's symmetric. And so you have to compensate the fact that it's a Hermitian here by M to be conjugate linear. Okay, so M is not a matrix, it's a matrix times something conjugate linear. So you can encode all kappa this way. Okay, but conjugate linear, this is important. Okay. And so a Frobenius subalgebra here will be called rigid invariant if, with respect to the basis, if the image of B by M is B itself. Okay. And of course, so this is not always true. If you take a Frobenius subalgebra, for example, in this example, you can check that one of the two here is not. So you rigid invariant for some. There exists for all bases. For all bases, one of the two will not be a rigid invariant. So why this rigidity invariant is important? Because it will make, under this assumption, which should very natural. In fact, when you see that it's not clear that it is something constraining, but in fact it's really constraining. It looks very natural. That the intersection Frobenius subalgebra, which are rigid invariant with respect to beta, will be closed by intersection. So as I said, this definition is for vec, but it's easy to see, and we will explain in details during the class, that you can extend the definition to semi-simple C-tensor category via multiplicity spaces. It's not clear how to generalize this notion without semi-simple or without tensor, only a monoidal, because you need you really need vector space to get some Hermitian structure. So you really need even for a field, it's not clear, because you need a field which look like very much to C to have this Hermitian structure. So here there is really an important new notion. It's a new notion, but I expect, well, I hope that this notion can be generalized beyond this. Let's see, for general tensor category or general linear monoidal category, K-linear monoidal category, abelian, K-linear, abelian monoidal category. So there is a digestion requirement, but we need to better understand this, how to generalize that. We need to find the way to categorical way to define that. Here we are very close to vector space. Okay, so why this is important, of course, because so for a general semi-simple C tensor category, in which we define that also with multiplicity space, we can prove that Frobenius subalgebra, any Frobenius subalgebra is beta Regina variant for some B. So you take such a category, you take a Frobenius algebra object and a Frobenius subalgebra object. They always exist a basis. So when you say basis here we are in it's a basis of the multiplicity space. So you have to, yeah. For which making it beta Regina, B Regina variant. Okay. So for all Frobenius algebra, there exists. But in the unitary case, the Frobenius subalgebra are beta Regina variant for all bases. So this is a very important distinction. In general, in this generality, there exist, but for unitary, if you add unitary, which is an extra assumption for that, it's true for all. And this is very important. This makes the unitarity assumption so strong. And of course, the Frobenius subalgebra Regina variant with respect to B are closed under intersection. So for making notation shorter, we call that Frobenius B subalgebra. The Frobenius B subalgebra is a B Regina variant Frobenius subalgebra. So we really have closed under intersection. So let me repeat again. This extra assumption is you cannot avoid because there is a counterexample here. And when we saw this counterexample, we think a lot and we say, okay, so what's wrong with this example? And the weakest assumption we found to avoid this kind of example is really that so we don't claim that there is nothing weaker, even weaker, but and in fact, yeah, it's an open problem how to make that weaker and weaker, and how to generalize also to something more general than that. But anyway, for the need of the class, this will be sufficient, and it can be further research how to generalize, how to make this weaker, etc., etc. Okay. Okay. Frobenius B subalgebra lattice. Okay, so now we will focus on this kind of object. Okay. So this sentence is important. It's a subtlety. Frobenius subalgebra are considered up to equivalence, capturing substructure. But be careful, this is strictly stronger than isomorphism. So here you have to be careful. When you because a Frobenius subalgebra is defined. So you have a Frobenius algebra X, and a Frobenius subalgebra is defined by another object and a monomorphism. So it's a pair. Okay? And there is an equivalence relation on this pair to capture exactly the notion of substructure, because we are not in set theory, so you cannot just say Y is a subset of X. No, you need a monomorphism. And in fact, you need this kind of pair, and you can have equivalence relation, which when you come back, for example, to set theory, it captures exactly the notion of subset. But this is strictly stronger than just saying that two objects are isomorphic, for example. For example, when you consider a subfactor, the Frobenius subalgebra corresponds to intermediate subfactor, which means, for example, you have a subfactor n, p, m, and another, you consider two intermediate, p1, p2, between n and m. You can have p1 and p2. How to say? This notion of equivalence relation captures exactly the intermediate subfactor, if you like. But if you go to isomorphism, then it's like if you consider isomorphic intermediate, which is strictly stronger, if you like. So this notion, be careful, this notion of equivalence relation of Frobenius subalgebra capture exactly the notion of substructure and not isomorphism, because Watatani's theorem, if you just consider up to isomorphism for intermediate, it's true even if you don't assume irreducible, it's true. You just need finite index, and it's always finite. The lattice is always finite if you have up to isomorphism. But just for intermediate subfactor, it's true if you assume irreducible. So this is a subtlety. We will come back to that during the class. It's important to be careful. Okay. Okay, so this equivalence relation defines a class this way, and in fact, it works very well in the sense that two Frobenius subalgebra are in the same class if and only if their self-dual idempotent are equal. Okay, and here you see, for people from subfactor planar algebra theory, that this generalized notion of biprojection. So it's you have a self-dual unital idempotent which represents the Frobenius subalgebra up to this equivalence. So this set of classes form a poset. It's a poset, partially order set, we will call Frobenius subalgebra poset. And of course, what we want is whether it is a lattice or not. It's not a lattice in general, but it's a lattice under this rigidity invariant assumption. So for every Frobenius algebra in a semi-simple C-tensor category, if Frobenius B subalgebra poset is a lattice. So here you fix B. So B is fixed. But for every fixed B, basis B, you have a lattice. So the choice of a basis B, it's like when you choose a basis, it's like choosing a perspective, a point of view, if you like. So without point of view, you have just a poset which may not be a lattice. If you fix a perspective, you fix a point of view, then the poset collapses into a lattice, in fact, a sublattice of this poset. It collapses into to be more precise, it collapses into a subposet, which is a lattice. So you have something without perspective, without point of view. It's a poset which may not be a lattice. You fix a point of view or perspective. You get a subposet which is always a lattice. And that's philosophically very important. Okay, that's very important slogan here. Every Frobenius subalgebra class lie in such a sublattice. So this is also very important. Here you have a poset of Frobenius subalgebra class. For every Frobenius subalgebra, there always exists a perspective keeping it in a sublattice because of that. Okay, every Frobenius subalgebra is origin invariant for some basis. So if you pick one, you can find this corresponding basis, and it will be kept by the perspective, by the collapsing of the perspective here. So every Frobenius subalgebra class lies in such a sublattice. Okay, so very important. And of course, in the unitary case, you don't need B, because in the unitary case, it's true for all B. So in the unitary case, you don't need B here, so you can say for every unitary Frobenius algebra, and here this is the point I want to make, very important. In the unitary case, what unitary case mean? Unitary case here mean not just unitary for that, but unitary for that and unitary for that. So the theorem is for every unitary Frobenius algebra in a unitary tensor category, its unitary Frobenius subalgebra poset is a lattice. So what do you see here? What you see is that, in fact, here you have to keep this B everywhere to make lattice. But in the unitary case, you have to keep the unitary everywhere. So Frobenius B subalgebra generalize unitary Frobenius subalgebra. So but it's much more general this way. So this putting this B here look annoying. You know, we want to remove that. We know it's not true in general, but in the very strong setting of unitary, in fact, you also have something similar. You have to put unitary everywhere. Unitary here, unitary here, unitary here. So this is very similar. So what we did by this rigidity assumption, it's quite good. This is quite good. And so, as I said, the expert should digest this notion. Maybe there is something behind that which is easier or something more general, but you need to put something. So this is the first step. Maybe we will do other research, other paper in the future where we will be able to find something cleaner. But for now, this is the only thing we found. Okay. Weak positivity. So now, okay, we found the weakest possible assumption to get a lattice. So lattice is not enough. We need finiteness. And for finiteness, we will need another extra assumption. So remember, we already know in the unitary case that we need irreducibility, so connectedness. But in fact, unitarity is something positive. There is a kind of positivity. In fact, it's even stronger than positivity. So in the proof of finiteness, the proof at some moment that some kind of positivity was required. And when we wanted to generalize the proof, in fact, we try to find the essence of what we really need from positivity, and we try to make it weaker possible for the proof to work without assuming unitary or without assuming positive. So the weakest notion we found is what we call weak positivity. Again, this is open research. In fact, in the future, we can find a better assumption or anyway. So what is weak positivity? So there is a very well-known notion of pivotal structure, sorry. And so this is well known. This notion is well known. So we introduce this notion of quasi-pivotal, which a weak version of that, because pivotal, you have two assumptions, and for quasi-pivotal, you only keep one of the two. So a quasi-pivotal structure on a rigid monoidal category is a natural isomorphism between the identity functor and the double dual functor. And what does it mean to be a natural isomorphism for that? It means a collection of isomorphism from object to double dual of the object, such that for all morphism F, in fact, F is equal to its double dual up to this isomorphism here, this way. Okay. So this is, so if you have such a natural isomorphism satisfying that, we will call that a quasi-pivotal structure. But for such a quasi-pivotal structure to be a pivotal structure, we need the extra assumption that this natural isomorphism is monoidal, which means that phi x tensor y is phi x tensor phi y. So monoidality. Okay. So this is a well-known definition. Pivotal, it's natural isomorphism, monoidal. So we remove monoidal. This is what we define as quasi-pivotal. And this distinction between with or without monoidal will be the distinction between positive and weak positive. As written here, a C tensor category is called positive. So if you remove that, it's called positive if there is a pivotal structure such that the trace of every element in the family is positive for all non-zero x. Okay, and it will be called weakly positive if there is a quasi-pivotal structure making this trace positive for all non-zero x. Okay. So when you have a pivotal structure, this is more or less what you call the categorical dimension. And the fact that it is monoidal means that this is the categorical dimension. So in the good setting, it's a linear character. So if you remove monoidal, it's no more a linear character. So you cannot call, in the weak case, you cannot call that categorical dimension. It's just a number. But what is nice is that for any semi-simple C-tensor category, it's always weakly positive. So you can always find a quasi-pivotal structure making this kind of positivity. You can, and in fact, the proof is. So we will make the proof of that also in the paper. In fact, the proof for some experts, they don't even prove that. Let's just say it's straightforward. So more or less, in fact, but if you want to prove that in details, the proof is straightforward, but it's a little bit long. It's a sequence of more or less straightforward argument. Or you just have to write the thing and to find the good. You need to, how to say, to fix the default of positivity, and you cannot fix it always by keeping the monoidality, but you can fix it by keeping the naturality. That's why for an expert in category theory, you can by hand it's trivial, but if you want to prove that in details, it's I want to say it's boring, if you like. It's boring, but you have to do that if you want to be rigorous. Okay. So it's always weakly positive. But in the unitary case, it's always positive. But be careful. This is not unitary imply positive, but positive may not imply unitary. Or at least it's an open problem whether positive imply unitary. More in particular, if you fix a finite in the finite case, so remember that unitary is always C because the complex is always defined in the unitary. But if you consider finite here, finite, in fact, we don't even assume semi-simple. A finite C-tensor category is positive if only if it is fusion and pseudo-unitary. So in fact, positivity for a finite, so here finite mean that are finitely many simple objects. Positivity imply semi-simple and imply pseudo-unitary, which means the categorical dimension equal the Frobenius point dimension. So in this case, positive is equivalent to fusion pseudo-unitary, and as I said, it's an open problem whether every pseudo-unitary fusion category admits a unitary structure. It's a very famous open problem. Which this open problem already exists in off-algebra theory. It's not known whether every finite dimensional semi-simple off-algebra admits it's a Kahl's algebra. It admits a star structure. It's an open problem due to Kaplansky, I guess. So yeah, very, very, very important. So it's not at all clear that you can go this way. But this is it's very important conjecture. Anyway, what is important to us is that we have a result, Watanabe's theorem, whose proof you need positivity, but we were able to generalize this positivity, and it worked for every semi-simple C-tensor category. And so now we will explain that this assumption will be enough to prove what we need in the good setting. Okay, so the last main ingredient before the stating of the result is the notion of formal angle. The notion of angle first. So, in fact, the proof by Watatani was purely functional analysis proof. So, but later, Bakshi, Dasliu, Ren in 2018 provide an alternating proof in the planar algebra framework. So planar algebra is a little bit more categorical than functional analysis. And they use a notion of angle, not formal angle, because we still be in subfactor theory, so it's angle, a true angle, to make their proof. And in fact, what they do not just find an alternating proof of Quaternius theorem, they also prove something new regarding the bound of the number of intermediate subfactors, the size of the lattice. They found the bound with respect to the index. So that was their new result. And for that, they use the notion of angle. This notion of angle was defined. So for subfactor plane algebra, in which you have inner product space, and you really need inner product space to define a true notion of angle. But in what we will, because we will deal with semi-simple seed-tensor category, which may not be unitary, the home space may not be inner product space. And so we will see that in fact you cannot define a true notion of angle, but just formally you can cook something and it will work. Okay, so in a semi-simple seed-tensor category, so weakly positive for some quasi-pivotal structure phi. So when you see it's weakly positive with respect to some phi. So yeah. So when you say you have to specify some phi for which it is weakly positive. You take a connected Frobenius algebra such that this is an algebra morphism. So this is really important. And here you see something we saw in the previous slide. Somewhere we mentioned that we need alpha to be an algebra morphism, and in fact, here, when we stated this generalization of Landau's theorem, we said that here alpha for the trace of that, the trace alpha of that to be that, we need alpha to be an algebra morphism, and in fact, this alpha will correspond to that. Phi x is an algebra morphism. So this is very important. So now you take two Frobenius subalgebra of x, which are rigid invariant with respect to B. So what we call two Frobenius B subalgebra. And you say they are distinct, so they are not in the same class. Okay, so in subfactor theory, it just means that you have two distinct intermediates. Okay, and you define the formal angle between these two self-dual idempotent, the formal angle with respect to the intersection, with respect to the idempotent of the intersection. Remember, we are in this setting, so this keep intersection of that is also of this form. So this is also a Frobenius B subalgebra. So you have a self-dual idempotent, and you define it this way. So we define a formal angle with respect to that in the following sense. And this is a little improvement with respect to this paper, because in this paper they define in the case that this intersection is trivial. But here we need, or we define that for all distinct with respect to the intersection. We don't need to be trivial, and we show that it's a little bit more efficient this way. Okay. So okay. So I will. It's time for the pause. No. So I will make the pause now. Pause. So pause. will come back after the post in this slide. Okay, so what is this formula for this angle, formal angle with respect to the intersection? So the formula is the following. So you consider, so so we will prove that everything makes sense here, that so this trace is positive. So we can take a square root. So this is a scalar. Here you have so B is a morphism, but it's a morphism in a it's a C-linear, so you can add and it makes sense to make this operation on morphism in a C-linear morphism. So you have this morphism composed with this morphism. So both are the same, except that you have A, B, B here. And you make the trace of that. Okay. And again, we will prove that this is in the range definition of arc cosinus. So you can take arc cos of that, and this is your formal angle. So this is, as I said, the exact generalization of the notion of angle here. But there are two generalizations. First, it is with respect to the intersection instead of being with respect to something. Instead of being in the case where the intersection is trivial. So this is a little bit more general. And what is even more general is that the home space, as I said, may not be an inner product space. It's not a unitary tensor category. And so the angle defined this way may not be, is no longer a genuine angle. It's just a formal angle. This is something formal, just a number. It may not be a true angle because this may not be an inner product structure. Let's have an inner product structure. But anyway, in any case, what we can prove, as well did here, that under this assumption, that this number is always strictly greater than pi over 3. So there is a gap. If they are equal, you can say it's 0, the angle is 0, even if the definition this is defined when it is different, and otherwise, so you have a gap between 0 and pi over 3. So here, this is not possible. So you have a gap. Okay. So as I said, so to prove that, and this is the main, the key part of the proof of the generalization of Watatani's theorem, this is really the key. We need to apply our generalization of Landau's theorem with alpha, as I said, to be this phi x, so phi x algebra morphism, coming from the quasi-pivotal structure here. So we need, so you have a semi-simple C star C, sorry, a semi-simple C tensor category. So you need to find, so we know there exists a quasi-pivotal structure making it weakly positive, but we need to choose one such that X this is an algebra morphism. Or on the other, you can see that differently. The other way to see that is you are in a semi-simple C tensor category, so weakly positive for some quasi-pivotal structure, and you only consider the connected Frobenius algebra for which this is an algebra morphism. So we have it depends in whether you first So this is okay. You start by that, and then two possibilities: you fix that, or you fix that first. But you cannot in general you cannot fix randomly this one and this one. If you fix that, this constrain that. But if you fix that, this constrain that. So maybe it's more natural to fix the quasi-pivot structure, making this quickly positive, and only consider the connected Frobenius algebra such that this is an algebra morphism. But you can also see this is the other way. In any way, this is this kind of restriction of assumption we need to prove that using Landau's theorem, generalization, which itself use exchange relation, etc. And as I said, that is the key. This is really the key of the proof for Watatani's theorem for tensor category. Okay. So here is so as we will see during the class, in fact, we will state many version of the theorem. Version which is as general as possible, which is and less general, up to reaching, in fact, the unitary case. So you have to choose in this spectrum of version the one you are interested in. Here we put here, this is not the more general version because it's a little bit more complicated, but one of the most general version, not the most, but one of the most. So in a semi-simple C tensor category, so weakly positive for some quasi-pivotal structure, consider a connected Frobenius algebra such that this is an algebra morphism. So in this statement, we first fix the quasi-pivotal structure and then we only consider the Frobenius algebra such that this is an algebra morphism. Then we already know that this is a lattice, but it's also finite lattice. So yeah, this is one of the most general generalization, one of the best generalization of Watatani's theorem. Okay, so here is how to say one sentence about the proof of that. So the proof in this paper really explicitly use the fact that the angle is a true angle. So we really use the inner product structure here. So because we have no more a true angle, the idea is to simulate this false angle, this formal angle, by a true angle. So we will have this as no inner product structure compatible with the tensor category, but you can formally put inner product structure in. This is just a vector space, five-dimensional vector space. You can put inner product structure here. So randomly, you can put an inner product structure. So we'll have two structure here, one with the inner product structure and one without. And the proof here, we need to find to fix an inner product structure which is as clever as possible, such that the angle you can simulate into a true angle. I will not go into more details, but I want to say that this is this sentence is maybe if for people who are interested in analysis, in fact, our paper is more or less purely categorical, except for this sentence. In fact, you have analysis a little. This is the only aspect of analysis in the work. Okay. So this is the general, and now we will state three versions which are less general. But as I said, in the paper, we listed much more. In fact. You have the most general, and here you have the unitary case, and you have a spectrum of intermediate version. So first, so in fact, the spectrum of intermediate version may not be a one-dimensional like that. It may be more like a poset, or it is not just like that. It's not this implies this implies this implies it's more like a poset. You can have a version like that, a version like that, which imply that. But for example, this version will not imply this version, etc. Okay, so take a connected Frobenius algebra in a positive semi-simple tensor category. So remember the notion of positivity, as I explicitly said several times, it's unknown whether this implies that. In general, it may not be true, but at least it's an open problem. So let X be a connected Frobenius algebra in a positive semi-simple tensor category, then its Frobenius B subalgebra lattice is finite. Okay. So you can only remember, beta in the unitary case, but you have to put unitary everywhere. So second version, let X be a connected Frobenius algebra in a pseudo-unitary fusion category, then its Frobenius B subalgebra lattice is finite. So here we really, as I said that all the versions in the paper are not in a line like that with implication, but what we wrote in this slide is really linear. It's really one-dimensional. This implies that, and this will imply that. But in the paper, we will see other versions which are. It's not how to say the set of versions is not totally ordered. It's just a poset, according to whether it is more general or not. Okay. But what we wrote here is a subposet of this poset, which is totally ordered. Okay, so the next version, to have this version for pseudo-unitary fusion category. So you have a finite lattice. And finally, in the unitary case, you don't need to assume the rigidity invariance, but you have to put unitary everywhere. So it's, yeah. Wait. Yeah, so what I said is wrong. So this implies this implies this, but this, wait. Yeah, this is more general. Okay, yeah, this implies this, of course, but if you put, because here it's pseudo-unitary, so if you put unitary here, you have a version. Unitary implies pseudo-unitary, so we have a version without putting unitary here and here. And the point is that this may be more general than that. Even in the unitary case, if you just put unitary here, the fact that it is beta rigid invariant may be more general if you don't put unitary here and here than putting unitary everywhere. So even for unitary tensor category, this version may be more general. Okay, so it's very important to emphasize that to put this B here is not a restriction compared to what you get in unitary tensor category, you really recover completely this reformulation of Watatani's theorem. So this is really Watatani's theorem reformulated in the category setting as suggested by Dave Pennis. But in fact, even in the unitary setting, even for unitary tensor category, what we get here may be more general. At least it's an open problem whether it is more general or not, but it's at least more general. So this is not a restriction. This is really natural. This is what you need, and it's an open problem. How to make this even weaker and weaker, but as I said. Okay. So in this general version, we put semi-simple, but for people interested in non-semi-simple thing, you can get a non-semi-simple version by a notion called semi-simplification. So when you have a non-semi-simple tensor category, you can make a semi-simple version by the semi-simplification. So it's when you consider a tensor category which may not be in the semi-simple case, every object decomposes into simple object. If you don't assume semi-simple, you cannot decompose into semi-simple object, but you have an alternative notion called indecomposable. And it's a theorem that every object decomposes into indecomposable, direct sum of indecomposable. And in fact, there is a transformation replacing indecomposable object into simple object. So you change the category, you make a semi-simplification, and via this transformation, you can state a non-semi-simple version of this thing. Okay, so now, application. So we will explain some application of this result to C-star algebra and of algebra. So for people who don't know operator algebra, so subfactor theory lie in the world of von Neumann algebra. Von Neumann algebra, which generalize the notion of measure space, so this is a quantum analog of measure theory. C-star algebra is a quantum analog of topological space. So measure space for von Neumann algebra, topological space for C-star algebra. So the world of C-star algebra is close to the world of von Neumann algebra, but there are some subtlety difference. The von Neumann algebra is a C-star algebra, but not all C-star algebra is a von Neumann algebra. You have a kind of completion. Anyway, so it's not the point to discuss that here. We can apply, because you can make unitary tensor category from a subfactor, from an inclusion of factor, from an inclusion of von Neumann algebra. But in fact, you can do that also from an inclusion of C-star algebra. And there is a notion of finite index inclusion here, unital, of C-star algebra due to Watatani. And for that, you need the notion of faithful conditional expectation. So, how to say? It's a little, you can see that as a generation of the notion of trace, where you generalize the field by the subalgebra. If you see this subalgebra as a generation of field, then this conditional expectation is like a trace. But anyway, I don't want to go into the details. In this paper by Shen et al., 2022, the bimodule this bimodule, so you can see this as a AA bimodule. This is a unitary Frobenius algebra in the tensor category of AA bimodule. So, so you really have this provides alternative model for unitary Frobenius algebra in unitary tensor category. You don't need to only consider subfactor and von Neumann algebra. You can also do that for C-star algebra. And because you can do that for C-star algebra, you can apply, if you reformulate result, if you have result here, if you prove that Watatani's theorem can be stated for unitary tensor category, then you can apply that to C-star algebra also. Okay, so this is what we did. So each intermediate C-star algebra here is a unitary Frobenius algebra. Okay, and so we were able to prove a finiteness theorem at the C-star algebra level. A finite index unital irreducible inclusion of C-star algebra has a finite number of intermediate C-star algebra. Okay, so it should, I did not write it's a lattice here, but it should be a lattice also. It's a finite lattice. Maybe we wrote this way because this straighten a result due to Ino Watatani 2014, where they need to assume A and B to be simple C-star algebra. In fact, but in the von Neumann algebra case, irreducible implies simple, but for C-star algebra, irreducible do not imply simple. So you can have, in fact, irreducible just imply centerless, has no center. But in the von Neumann algebra setting, simple is equivalent to centerless, what we call a factor. But in the C-star algebra setting, this is no more true. So you can have centerless C-star algebra which are not simple. And the example is the following. You take a non-trivial amenable ICC group. You take the reduced C-star algebra generated by this group. This is centerless but non-simple. This is due to Delard. 27. So, because you have this kind of example, this corollary is a proper improvement of this result where they assume simple. And let me mention here, because this is a good place, that we discuss in private with Watatani. And in fact, Watatani confirmed that this result, without simple assumption, cannot be deduced from his paper here. You cannot use the tool of this paper to prove that directly from his paper. According to Watatani, this is not possible because there is a problem of compatible conditional expectation. This is in fact the not the application, the restriction as the key issue. The key issue when you want to generalize without assuming simplicity is that in the simple case, it's always compatible. And in fact, this was confirmed by a paper by Ved Gupta. Yeah. That wrote the details why you need a compatible conditional expectation if you don't want to assume simplicity. So Ved Gupta provide a proof, a functional analysis proof for such a theorem, but under the assumption of compatibility. And here there is no simple assumption, there is no compatibility assumption. It's really general. So you cannot, so as far as the expert know, you cannot deduce this result by a functional analysis way. You really need the tool, up to now, you need the tool of category theorem. So this is very important point. So up to now, we need the tool. So maybe in the future, we will, for example, if you can prove that it's the compatibility always hold, which is not known, then you can have, if you can prove with functional analysis that the compatibility always, the required compatibility always hold, then you will get a functionality proof. But as long as you did not prove that, then the categorical proof is the only known proof. Okay, so this is new. This is really new. Okay. Okay. Application to op algebra. Okay, so provide application to operator algebra by C-star algebra. Now application to Hopf algebra. And my dream, I will explain the Hopf algebra, but my dream is to have application to algebraic geometry also, a number theory. So we start to think a little bit about number theory, but we need more concrete result. So what about Hopf algebra? So you need Frobenius algebra. So a result of Larson, Swidler, and Parey-Gies say that a finite dimensional Hopf algebra is a Frobenius algebra in VEC. So in fact, we already mentioned that yesterday. Here, you don't assume something simple, just finite dimensional algebra is a Frobenius algebra in VEC. In VEC. And as we mentioned before, we proved that it is a connected Frobenius algebra in the representation category of the dual of algebra. So so we put folklore here because we did not find this statement written explicitly in the literature. But in fact, the proof we use here, it's a little patchwork of proof we can find somewhere in the literature, some this way, in this. So if you group together some known proof and you put some details, in fact, so I'm not sure that this statement was explicitly known to experts. For example, in the book Tensor Category by Tinkoff, Gelafini, Shostrik, they stated something like that, but under I forgot, in fact.
Simpson.
Not, yeah, maybe something simple, but not that. It was about I forgot the thing. So it was not like that. Under something, yeah, it was a connected Frobenius algebra in, yeah, it's a Drinfeld center, maybe. In the Drinfeld center of that. Yeah, something like that. So that they involve the Drinfeld center. That did not state it's a connected Frobenius algebra in here. They proved it's a connected Frobenius algebra in the Drinfeld center. The quantum double. They use something quantum double or, yeah. Okay. So we wrote the proof in details of that. So I expect some expert knew that, but we did not find explicitly the proof in the literature. So if somewhere in the audience know where this is explicitly proved, so we are very interested. Otherwise, but you will find the explicit proof, detailed proof in our paper. If semi-simple, it admit, so we apply Waterton's theorem here. If it is semi-simple, it admits a finite number of Frobenius B subalgebra. Okay, so here we need B. Okay. So there still we need some extra work to reformulate everything in terms of algebra theory, because this is tensor category theory the notion. So we need to reformulate, and in fact we try a little bit, but there is a notion here of we wanted to connect Frobenius subalgebra with Lev-Koadil subalgebra. Okay. Scriabin proved that Lev-Koadil subalgebra of a finite dimensional of algebra is a Frobenius algebra in VEC. In VEC. But we were not able to prove whether it's a Frobenius algebra here. It's not clear whether it's a Frobenius algebra here. And maybe now I think maybe it may be a good idea to try to see whether it's a Frobenius algebra in the Drinfeld double, because in tensor category book that considers the Drinfeld double. So we should check whether the Lev-Koadil subalgebra are Frobenius subalgebra in the Drinfeld double. But in my opinion, I guess it's also not clear. In fact, we discussed with Scriabin in private, and for him, it was not at all clear that should be a Frobenius subalgebra. In fact, it should be a Frobenius algebra in here. You have really some key issue. There are some key issue. So it's really an open problem. It's not clear, and I expect that it's also not clear in the Drinfeld double, but we have to check. As I said, we have significant difficulty for that, confirmed by Scriabin in private. But what is very important is that in the unitary case, this is true. Because in the unitary case, for subfactor plan algebra, Hopf algebra corresponds to depth 2, irreducible, and we know by a result of Izumi-Longo-Popa that so you have a result for subfactor. If you reformulate, you get that. If I'm not mistaken, you get that. So you get that it's really a Frobenius algebra because it corresponds to intermediate subfactor. Yeah, there is a Galois correspondence here saying that Lev-Koadil star subalgebra is in 1-1 correspondence with intermediate subfactor. So we know that intermediate subfactor correspond to Frobenius subalgebra. So in particular, it's a Frobenius algebra in here. And I guess, yeah, it's okay. So in the unitary setting, this is true. So it's a good starting point, but yeah. Okay. So because, I wrote that if time permits, I will discuss a speculative direction closer to number theory, in fact. In the following slide, otherwise I will stop here, but now we remain 10 minutes. So we will, for the last 10 minutes, we will explain this speculative direction. So as I said, we provide the application to sister algebra, Hopf algebra, application of Watatani's theorem. What we expect is the existence also of application to algebraic geometry, number theory. We did not think much about that up to now, but it will be good to discuss with experts in number theory and algebraic geometry, which are familiar with the notion of Frobenius algebra, and to see how we can apply this kind of result. But regarding just the notion of lattice, so the last slide will not be about Watatani's theorem, but it will be about Frobenius subalgebra lattice in tensor category and some connection with number theory. In fact, with a way to generalize the Riemann hypothesis. So this is really a big surprise. It's really a big surprise, and I have no choice but to put this emoticon here because people can think it's a fake, in fact, but it's not a fake. It's how to say. What we will explain here is how to generalize the Riemann hypothesis to tensor category. So this generalization, we do not state at all that this generalization is true. So most people believe that Riemann hypothesis is true, but we do not state that this generalization should be true. It's just what we are saying, that here is a way how to generalize this statement. So this generalization makes sense. So you really recover the true Riemann hypothesis as a particular case of this generalization. But we are not saying that this generalization is accurate. It's, okay, so let me explain. So in fact, the Riemann hypothesis has plenty of reformulation. And so when I, in fact, one of my work in the past, when I was a postdoc in India, I wanted to generalize. There is a notion due to Dietmar Bisch, is a notion of maximal subfactor without intermediate. Here we consider the lattice of subalgebra, Frobenius subalgebra, but what happens if there is nothing, just the Frobenius algebra and the trivial Frobenius algebra, and nothing in between? In the subfactor setting, this means that you have a subfactor and nothing in between. It's maximal. And this really looks like the notion of prime number. A prime number is really a number without non-trivial factor, except one and itself. And in fact, this you can consider a cyclic group of prime order, and you make a subfactor, and what you get is a maximal subfactor. So the notion of maximal subfactor is really the generalization of the notion of prime number. And so, trivial lattice corresponds to prime number. And in my previous work I did in India, I say, okay, you generalize the notion of prime number, but what about generalizing the notion of natural number? And for that, you have to replace the notion of trivial lattice by notion of distributive lattice. Okay? So you have a notion of natural number, generalization of natural number, generalization of prime number. And of course, the very fundamental conjecture on prime number is the Riemann hypothesis. So I think how to generalize the Riemann hypothesis to this setting of generalized prime number in subfactor theory. So I stated something in subfactor planar algebra in the past, which can be generalized even further to tensor category. So as I said, you have plenty of way to reformulate the Riemann hypothesis, and the key was to find the good reformulation of the Riemann hypothesis for which you can state something, you can generalize it to subfactor planar algebra, and here to tensor category. So the generalization we use, is the one due to Robin in 1984. So you consider the arithmetic function called divisor sum function. So you take a natural number and you make the sum of all the divisor. This is called the divisor sum function. And so it's a result in a number theory that the limit sub of sigma n divided by n log n is exponential gamma, where gamma is the Euler constant. Okay? So limit sub of that, this is true. And in fact, the Riemann hypothesis, according to Robin paper, can be reformulated by the fact that sigma of n is less than that for n large enough. In fact, he proved that for n equal to something like 5,000 or something like that. He proved explicitly, but in fact, the equivalence reformulation, you just need large enough and it's okay. So it's like if you have some asymptote, you have something and you have some asymptotic, but at some point, it's always below. Okay? So it converges in some sense. You have something, but it's always below and it converges to something like that. So this is the reformulation of Riemann hypothesis. But you can do now this is really a good way to generalize to tensor category. So what about? So we need to generalize all these ingredients. So you take a connected Frobenius algebra in a positive tensor category. And here, this is the categorical dimension. In a positive tensor category, we wrote the categorical dimension as a norm like that. As a, yeah, this is norm, module. Yeah, so this is a categorical dimension or dimension. This is positive, that's why we wrote it this way. And you consider the lattice, you consider the, so what is that? Consider the Frobenius subalgebra of X, but not the Frobenius subalgebra, but the set of dimension of the Frobenius subalgebra. So here, because you are in a tensor category, so in the tensor category, every object is finite in some sense, in the sense of Jordan-Holder. And so this is always finite. So the set of dimension of the Frobenius subalgebra is always finite. If you replace this by a class, this may not be finite. For being finite, you need this extra assumption, which was written in here. You need at least. It's not true in general, but it's not true. But if you put the dimension, it's trivially true, but it's finite. So you have a finite set here. The set of, and this dimension of Frobenius algebra correspond to the divisor of the number. In fact, it is not just an analogy, it is a generalization, because you can, from a natural number, you can make a group, cyclic group, and from a cyclic group, you can make a Frobenius algebra, and where the Frobenius subalgebra are the subgroup, and the subgroup correspond to the group of order D, where D divide N. So this divisor set, written this way, is a generalization of the set of divisor. It's a proper generalization. It's not just an analogy. Because you have a finite set, you can make a sum. Okay, like that, you make a sum. So this is a proper generalization of the divisor sum function. This is really okay. There is no problem here. So we have all the ingredients. So now this thing. So you have to. So the first component of the hypothesis or of the open problem, the statement, we do not say that. We do not even say it's a conjecture, because we don't know whether it is relevant or not. But it's a statement. You can state that, but you need to fix the depth. So the notion of depth, we generalize the notion of depth for Frobenius algebra tensor category. And for example, for Frobenius algebra coming from off algebra, the depth is 2. For group, the depth is 2. And the true Riemann hypothesis will be that the depth for depth 2. But you need to fix the depth, because the first generalization I did several years ago for subfractal algebra, I did not fix the depth, but in fact, the statement was not true. In fact, you can find a counterexample, because of the fact that for subfactor, there is an accumulation point at 4. But this accumulation point of subfactor of index 4 you have to increase the depth. But the point is that if you fix the depth, you only have finite index, finite depth fixed. You only have a countable, not countable, but how to say, there is no accumulation point, or at least up to, there is no example with accumulation point. And in fact, so you can state this way, and one consequence is what I said, there is no accumulation point for a fixed depth. And in fact, there is no, if you fix, for example, one application of that in subfactor theory, one consequence of that, if you fix irreducible subfactor finite index and you fix the depth, then you consider all the possible index, then the gap between two successive index will be bounded, something like that. So you have some consequence. So because you have some consequence of that, you have also a way to disprove that if you can find a sequence of subfactor of finite index of fixed depth where the index is the gap between indexes is there is no bound, then you can disprove this. So the first is that for a fixed depth, you have so this really makes sense. This makes sense, but you say that it's of this form for some constant. So I don't know whether it should be. We have to check. In general, it's not clear whether it should be zero or infinite. Because if it's of this form, that means it's not zero, it's not infinite. It's okay. So if you can prove that this is not zero and not infinite, then it's always of this form for some, it should be greater than one. Something greater than one. You can always find this way, so okay. But you don't know the constant. And the second point is that for corrected Froist algebra of dimension large enough, then this is always less than that. So this is a proper generalization of that, which is a proper reformulation of the Riemann hypothesis. And so when you fix the depth equal to 2, you really recover the Riemann hypothesis. So when I say really recover, we have to be careful about. Yeah, it's a work we are working on with Moina Ghosh nowadays. Is that in the unitary setting, depth 2 is equivalent to Hopf algebra, but in general, it's not clear that if you have a Hopf algebra which is not unitary, not semi-simple or something like that, it's not clear to us whether it's of depth 2. So, okay, but in any case, the depth 2 cover the Riemann hypothesis because it covers the unitary case. And that's all. So next week, we will start from here and we will really write all the details of the paper. So the first paper, this paper, we will cover this paper in details. So next week, we will start from here. And cover the paper in detail. So see you next week.